So good morning. This is the initial kickoff of our webcast called Dancing with Change in Facility Management. So I am co-hosting this. My name is Kathleen Losman, and I'm with the Facility Management Consultants Council, and we are profiling expertise in facility management. Co-hosting with me is Stephanie Brounstein, and she is currently in Arizona and has been in this facility management industry for a really long time. Steph, do you want to just give us a quick overview of your bio?
Well, I am originally Californian, worked at McAfee Securities for many years, starting as their Mac manager, all the way and worked my way up to their facility manager before we moved to Arizona in 2020. I've been in facilities for 25 years, doing all kinds of projects from, paint and carpet to full construction build outs, and have enjoyed every single minute of it and wouldn't change a thing on here. I think it's just a fascinating profession, and you learn when you're on the ground, whether that morning something happens or a huge project is ongoing. And I just welcome all the young professionals to join us in this exciting profession.
Oh, that's a great segue. Great segue. Thank you, Steph. It is a very exciting industry. And on that note, we've got as our guest Grant Sommerfeld, who is a facility manager with a lengthy history as well, that's worked in various industries on facilities. So could you give us a quick overview of your background, Grant?
Yeah, for sure. And Stephanie, when you said you're welcoming young professionals to the profession, I personally thank you as one of them.
Welcome,
maybe not so young. I began my career in finance and accounting in the private sector in the consumer product industry, and that eventually evolved into a job where I did a lot of organizational effectiveness consulting. And my last consulting project during that phase of my career was a facilities management department. It was 2005. Well, I fell in love with FM and I never left. So during my tenure in FM, I've been the chief facilities officer for the Saskatoon Health Region, the manager of the corporate properties division of facilities management for the city of Calgary, and the associate vice president of facilities management for Mount Royal University. So after 17 years of leading in FM, leading departments, I went back to my roots as a consultant, and I now work with facility leaders, primarily in the post-secondary sector, but also in healthcare, focused on helping them essentially solve problems and future-proof their FM operations. And I'm just loving doing this.
So we want to talk about change, and I think that that is something that's experienced by everyone all the time, but certainly I think probably change was really forefront with the COVID situation, and how in particular facility managers had to pivot quickly and start to handle that kind of change. Now, change has always been around us for sure, and I know within everyone's career they've had all kinds of changes happen and that they had to respond to. So even something like the change of seasons, that changes the weather, that changes the need to heat and cool and everything else. So could you tell us a bit, Grant, about how you responded to some of those changes? Firstly, what they were and what you learned from them as well.
COVID, in my opinion, was a real game changer. And things in FM have been very different because of it. And I think when it appeared, nobody really understood what it was, what COVID was and how serious it was and all the parameters around it. So it became, front and center in terms of, well, people became scared. Like within the FM staff, like they're front and center, they're touching everything, they're everywhere. And there was a great deal of fear about like exactly what is happening here. What is this COVID? And should I be worried about it? Rumors started. And then suddenly the institution began to change and send people off site to work. And you had an FM department who was left behind, working in the building and asking the question, well, if it's not safe for the others, why are we here? So when you dealt with a workforce that was, had a lot of questions, a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, you had to move to the point where you were really communicating continually, and it had to be in person. You had to send fact sheets out, the whole bit. And I found that was, that's something that probably should have always been done, but we certainly did a lot more because of COVID and because we had this workforce that was concerned. Then issues came up around air filtration. What level, are we doing a MERV 13 or what is the air filtration system? And suddenly everybody became interested in the HVAC system, and we had to explain how it worked and, what the filtration was and so forth. People that really, had never, outside of FM, that just had never known about it, it became front and center to them.
So
The
welcome to
same
the
with the
mechanical room,
PPE.
right?
Pardon me?
Right.
Welcome to the mechanical room. This is an opportunity
Well,
as well.
it was. I can't tell you how many professors of different things I explained HVAC to. And they had never really thought about it, but suddenly the building went from something you take for granted to something that was front and center. You looked at a light switch, and when's the last time this was sanitized? And how did they sanitize it? So new issues showed up. Access control. How do we funnel people into the building through a single point or controlled points where there are proper hand sanitization stations and there's PPE available for them? And we're talking big buildings with, dozens and dozens of entrances. And suddenly you're asking people to change their walking patterns to go somewhere different and come through this point and, sanitize your hands, put on a mask, and then do what you're going to do. And they're asking all kinds of questions. Well, okay, I'm going to do that. I don't like it. It's inconvenient, but I'm going to do it. But then they want to know, well, exactly how often do you clean the washrooms? How do you sanitize? What chemicals are you using? Are you doing all of the touch points? All of these questions came up as people, really started thinking about themselves and how they operate in a building and how the building itself functions. And it was a real game changer. And I think it forced FM leadership to actually start getting out more and engaging with the senior leadership group of the organization, because FM went from just something that happened, a transactional service provider, to something much more strategic in terms of how are we going to operate this organization under the terms and conditions of COVID. And, and it's not just COVID. I've seen that in healthcare too with H1N1 and norovirus, where you get an outbreak of a very contagious, virus, and, things have to change, and they have to change quickly. And I think the real point I took away from COVID, that someone once said that it's not the strongest who survive, it's the most adaptable who survive. And I think that's really, really true.
I agree. Yes.
So with that learning in place, like that's very profound. And I think that the fact it generated all of this sudden interest in the building is a real game changer for facility management. So how to best capitalize on that interest and keep that interest in place and keep occupants curious about how buildings function and why they function that way.
Well, since COVID, the anxiety about COVID has kind of is lessened. I think interest in the buildings has lessened as well. And we have still, I believe, a real opportunity within FM to try to keep the momentum we had going, to keep the physical environment front and center. When you take a look at the cost of the buildings and operating them and amortization and everything else, and how critical they are to an institution's reputation, productivity, everything else, FM's got a big role to play. And too often a building is built by an architect, designed by an engineer, and then just given to FM to maintain. And that model really doesn't work. We do need to engage people into the building, how we maintain it, and how we renovate it, especially as we move deeper into things like telework or remote work, hybrid work, and people's ongoing interest in security now, with of their physical safety inside buildings, of how the cleanliness in the health of the building. How do we perpetuate that after COVID? I think is a challenge. I've offered behind the walls tour, and I always took people through the boiler rooms and the interstitial spaces on tours, and just kind of talked it up about how big it is. People walk past a door 30 years and never know what's behind it. You open the door and there's your central plant. Now people they're just astounded that you have this much stuff. Or you'll see a stack of servers. I took an HR executive through once, and there were a stack of servers that we had to operate the building automation system. And she said, "Why does IT have equipment down here?" "It's not IT," I said, "it's ours. We run these things, we manage them." And then we got into a discussion about the changing nature of jobs within FM. For example, a lot of people still have perceptions of FM as very mechanical, guys with grease under their fingernails. That's not it anymore at all. And job descriptions, pay grades, and all those things need to be looked at in regards to that. So you need to FM needs to educate its peers. Budgets are notoriously difficult in FM because you've got the utilities impacted by weather, impacted by government rates, impacted by commodity prices, which are in turn impacted by world events. And then you've got extreme weather coming in, and now you're dealing with costs and problems with unpredictable and often awful weather. And then COVID was just another example. Like I said earlier, I've been through H1N1 and norovirus, and they all were very building specific problems, whereas COVID was broad. It's still all changed FM. So getting back to your question in my long-winded answer, I think you do need to really work as an FM leader with your peers in HR and IT and finance and marketing communications, just to make sure they understand where you're coming from and what your issues are. And I think you need to engage in direct communication with stakeholders and occupants and tenants and users. And how you do that, forgot to turn my phone on. How you do that, I think you really need to shift to a mindset of not using words and reports and lots of numbers. You need to distill it down. I like infographics and graphics and visual things, visualization of data. But I think it's all upon FM. FM needs to up its communication game, and it needs to continue to press for that role as a strategic partner, just not a transactional provider of services.
So do you then knock on the door of the C-suite and have frequent conversations with colleagues in HR, in finance, and so on? And do you invite them to tour the facility and impart some knowledge about how it works, how it functions, how it's impacted by all kinds of different things that you just pointed out? So really that kind of knowledge sharing. Or how do you engage the rest of the organization in a conversation to better understand the impact the physical environment has on the organization itself?
Well, I personally have done all of those things. So I would go to the executive group and offer tours to show them things. If something bad happened, I would offer tours to go to the site and say, look at this. When buildings are being built or major renovations are happening, I would offer them tours to go through the space and just see it firsthand. That was always helpful. And then I would publicly, through the marketing and communications groups, offer tours to anybody who wanted to go. And I would do them 3 or 4 times a year, and I would just walk them through a tour, and people found it interesting. And and it really opened doors, it opened eyes, and it was just a good experience. Once in a university, I set up a booth, on a high traffic area, and I sat there with a bunch of chocolates in front of me, and I said, "Look, I'm the FM guy. Ask me any questions you want." And it was really good. I ate far too many chocolates myself. But you know what? It's just that exposure. And I even went on to Reddit one time and let people ask questions. So I think you have to try a bunch of different things. And I talk a lot with the unions and the student union. And I would engage them in the things that, we're working on and hearing them, what are their concerns? And, that was always really interesting. And I also attended team meetings, so department head meetings. So, for example, in post-secondary, the dean of science, I would go to his chair's meeting and just kind of discuss FM, but more take in what they were feeling. One of my favorite things in all of that engagement is you find out little things that are just irritating. They've given up on, they just learn to live with it. But when you tackle some of those minor irritations, you learn a lot of things about, that often the root cause of them is something more of an opportunity. And I find by chasing them down, it's always been, a pretty rewarding experience. And to do that, you have to have that face-to-face communication.
Yeah, I think, Steph, you probably had so much of that as well because, working with occupants on projects on Mac and so on, you really need to know and understand occupants and what their requirements actually are.
Well, what Grant just outlined is a great footprint, and I was very lucky to be able to have access to the C-suite automatically with projects, with issues, questions. So I had that ability to go and talk to VPs in engineering and IT. And my team, I was called the quarterback when I was at McAfee. And I literally sat next to IT and procurement and finance and HR. And so I had that ability to engage everyone. And I think it's so important, especially now in FM, that we are visible, that we are the face of the site. Okay, not just the repair person or the, can you put out this fire person, that we are engaged in everything that happens in our building. And so Grant, how, from that perspective, how do you see that evolving, in our current environment with FM?
Well, I do think you just do need to just really, push your role and remind your staff and yourself and everybody else that why FM exists is for people. People use that space to either deliver or consume services or products. So why FM exists is for people. We help facilitate that engagement and the use of that space for a bigger purpose, for the mission of the organization. What we do to further that aim is we manage that space. We are the providers of the workspace where people, get together to work, teach, learn, live, recreate, and consume. So I think it's a mindset shift that FM really needs to focus, change its thinking into it's a people business, not a building business. Building is just what we do. Why we do it is people. And when you start thinking that way, FM becomes much more of a strategic enabler, and that's where it belongs. When it's part of the strategy, people pay attention to it. When it's the transactional provider of services, people just kind of take it for granted until it comes time for budgets.
I think you're making such a good point there. And I think that really the job of facility management starts outside the building, the site, how the site is actually accessed, whether it's pedestrian traffic, whether it's public transit, whether it's vehicles and parking and everything else that goes along with it. Now, I think the challenge as well is how much technology is impacting not just the building itself, which is significant, but also the occupants and what role that facility management plays in facilitating that. You talked about servers earlier, and servers take a fair bit of power as well, so that we're the integrators, facility managers, that start to connect the dots around all of these different things, and which really then underscores the need to be part of the team, be the team leader, in fact. Can you speak a bit to that?
For sure. I mean, you're right. When, like, in a hospital, for example, if you're somebody from the public that needs to go to the hospital, well, you're a little bit stressed. Nobody wants to go there. And it just begins like, where's the entrance? Wayfinding, where do I park? Now I'm in the building, how do I find this department? So those are all physical things. And you do have the grounds, and it needs, they're going to need to be watered. In Calgary and in most places, snow and ice need to be managed. And all of those things affect the safety and the perspective of an institution. When you walk in the front door of any institution, you make some initial judgments. Is this a good place? Is it modern, clean, clear? And a lot of that stuff now becomes technologically related. When you think about wayfinding, signage inside a building are expensive, and when people move, offices or departments change, you don't just change one sign. You got to change the signs all the way back to the entrance. And that starts getting expensive. And people are constantly on the move. So if your signage gets out of date, you got lost people. And you don't want lost people in a hospital. You don't want students missing their exams. And you don't want the frustration that comes to it. So electronic wayfinding, that's one modern way that you can help people get around in a building. You see them in malls. You walk in, there's a kiosk there. You kind of punch in the store you want, and it shows you the walking map. Healthcare needs things like that. Universities do, shopping malls, any big, large building. So that's one thing. And then as you walk around the building, you see, well, there's lights on, but there's nobody here. And why? That's expensive. You send people to clean washrooms, not based on need, but based on schedule. And you clean rooms, meeting rooms, based on schedule, not need. And I think the big savings to be had are working with IT, because a lot of this is very IT centric responsibility about things with occupancy sensors, wayfinding, and shifting the way you manage the building away from schedule and towards need. You're going to save money. The light, if nobody's in that room, the light should not be on. And if a room is designed to hold 80 people and there's 4 people meeting in it, occupancy sensors, again, it's a misallocation of space. You could use that space for something else. And as we move into telework, there's going to be things about, or remote work. Well, how often are hoteling stations used? Or is a remote worker has a full-time office, but they're only in it 2 days a week? Things like that are going to allow institutions to change their footprint and the very fundamental cost structures around utility consumption and maintenance. And they're going to improve service levels because, hey, if something needs to be done, it's done. So if that bathroom needs to be cleaned 8 times a day based on traffic, well, it'll get 8 times a day cleaning. The most interesting thing right now in FM is just a leap forward in technology.
I think
Occupancy sensors are like vibration sensors on equipment. I mean, you can now start realistically moving from preventative maintenance to predictive maintenance. You get the vibration sensors, humidity sensors, heat sensors. There's a lot of different things now that tell you ahead of time that something needs to happen to stop a problem. It is just so interesting.
this is actually very interesting. This is a super introduction to the changes going on in the world of facility management. And we've just begun. We've just started to poke at different things that are of interest and growing interest as things change around us. So I want to thank you, Grant, for helping us open this conversation. I think we're going to be back to more because this is just the invitation to continue these great discussions. So I want to thank you very much for showing up. And I think we'll be in touch again.
Yes.
Well, thank you for having me, and I enjoyed it. I could talk about FM all day.
I like it.
I do too. I do too.